Mia never expected that working at a lively city nightclub would lead her into a world of danger. What seemed like an exciting chance to escape her small-town life quickly turned into a nightmare. She soon realized the club wasn't just about music and dancing. It was a cover for a gang handing out dangerous drugs to young people. As Mia started to uncover the truth, she found herself trapped in a web of lies and fear, with no way out. Each night at the club felt more dangerous, and Mia was the only one who saw the trouble coming. Mia had always dreamed of escaping her small town. The city lights promised adventure, excitement, and a life that felt far from the ordinary. So, when she landed a job at a popular downtown club, she couldn't believe her luck. The job wasn't glamorous, bartending and serving drinks to an eclectic crowd of partygoers, but it was enough to make her feel like she was a part of something bigger. The club's neon signs illuminated the streets at night, drawing in people from all walks of life. Her first night at work was overwhelming. The loud music, the flashing lights, and the constant buzz of conversation were a lot to take in, but Mia was determined to make the most of it. She quickly found her rhythm behind the bar, serving drinks with a smile, trying to make each customer feel special. The regulars seemed to appreciate her friendly demeanor, and the tips weren't bad either. She made friends with the other staff members, and slowly she started to feel like she belonged. The atmosphere in the club was electric, filled with energy that felt contagious. Every night brought a different crowd. Some people were there to dance, others to drink and socialize, and a few just to enjoy the music. Mia loved the diversity, the mix of personalities and stories that passed through the club's doors. It was exactly the kind of change she'd been hoping for when she left her quiet hometown behind. However, as the days turned into weeks, Mia began to notice something strange. It was subtle at first, just little oddities here and there. A particular group of men, always dressed in dark, unassuming clothing, would show up at the club, usually late in the evening. They weren't like the usual partygoers. They didn't drink much or socialize with the other patrons. Instead, they would sit at the same table in the back corner of the club, talking quietly among themselves, their heads bent close together as if discussing something secretive. At first, Mia thought they were just regular patrons who preferred to keep to themselves, but as she started to see them more often, she couldn't ignore the strange aura they gave off. They never stayed for long, always slipping out quietly just before the club's closing time. There was something almost deliberate about their comings and goings. One night, she overheard one of the men whisper to the bartender, "Make sure she gets it by midnight." The words didn't make sense at the time, but they lingered in her mind. Who was she, and what did they need by midnight? Her curiosity grew, but she pushed the thought aside, telling herself it was probably just a misunderstanding. As the weeks went by, Mia started to see more of these men. They began arriving at the club with increasing frequency, always staying in that same dark corner. More troubling, the group was becoming associated with a noticeable shift in the club's usual crowd. She began noticing younger people, teenagers and people in their early 20s, coming in more often. These young faces, which had never been a part of the club's typical clientele, seemed to gravitate toward the men in the back corner. It wasn't just their age that was odd. There was a nervous energy about these newcomers, as if they were unsure of why they were there, or what they were supposed to be doing. It made Mia uncomfortable. She didn't know exactly why, but something about the entire situation felt off. The men's presence seemed to be tied to this new influx of young people. Mia couldn't help but feel like she was witnessing something she shouldn't be seeing. The quiet conversations, the furtive glances, and the increasingly suspicious behavior made her wonder what was going on behind the scenes. Every time she served the group, she felt an unsettling chill down her spine. The group's secrecy was becoming too obvious to ignore. Then, one fateful night, Mia witnessed something that would change everything. As the club was winding down, she saw one of the young men who had been frequenting the club leave in a hurry, clutching a small package tightly in his hand. The group of men watched him go, and one of them nodded as if signaling to someone. Mia's heart raced. She didn't know what was going on, but she felt certain that it was dangerous. She tried to shake off the feeling, but deep down she knew that something was terribly wrong at the club. What was in that package? Why were the young people suddenly so drawn to the men in the corner? Mia had a bad feeling, but she couldn't put the pieces together yet. Little did she know, the truth was much darker than she could have imagined. The unease in Mia grew stronger every time the men entered the club. She tried to push aside her suspicions, telling herself that she was just being paranoid. After all, the club was a busy place, full of strange people and unpredictable behavior. But as the men continued to show up, their presence became impossible to ignore. The young people they interacted with were always nervous, always looking over their shoulders as if they were waiting for something to happen. Mia couldn't help but notice how different they seemed from the usual club-goers. They didn't dance or drink like the others. Instead, they stayed close to the men, watching them closely, almost as if they were under their spell. There was an odd energy about them, a mix of eagerness and fear that Mia couldn't shake. What was even more unsettling was how these young people would leave the club so abruptly. It was as if they came for a specific purpose, and once it was fulfilled, they would quickly disappear into the night. They never seemed to hang around, and Mia started to wonder what they were doing after they left. The club was a place for fun, for letting loose, but these individuals had no interest in any of that. They came, they got something, and they left. Mia was no longer able to ignore the pattern that was developing right before her eyes. The men would sit at their usual table, often staring at their phones, their faces hidden in the dim light. Occasionally, one of them would leave the table, only to return a few minutes later, sometimes with a package in hand. Mia had seen enough to know that it wasn't just a random occurrence. These men were involved in something. But what? The mystery was consuming her thoughts, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just within reach. One evening, Mia caught sight of a familiar young man, someone who had been in and out of the club several times over the past few weeks. He was standing near the back door, nervously looking around as if checking for someone. Moments later, one of the men from the group walked up to him and handed him something small and wrapped in a piece of cloth. The young man's hands trembled as he took the package, glancing around once more before hurrying out the door. Mia's heart began to race. What had he just taken from them? Why was he acting so suspiciously? She had seen transactions like this before in movies and TV shows, but she never thought she would witness something like this in real life. The fear and nervousness in the young man's eyes told Mia everything she needed to know. Whatever was in that package wasn't something he wanted to be seen carrying around. It was illegal. It was dangerous. And Mia was now certain that the men were involved in a criminal operation. The next few days were filled with questions. What was the club's role in all of this? Was it just a meeting place? Or was the staff, like herself, unwittingly helping to facilitate something much darker? Mia began to feel trapped. The club was the only job she had in the city, and she didn't want to risk losing it by raising alarms. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore what was happening under her nose. Every shift, every drink she served, every exchange she witnessed felt like a piece of the puzzle slipping further into place. Mia's fear began to grow. The men had their eyes on the young people, and she knew they weren't just after a quick profit. They were using the club to recruit and control. What they were doing wasn't just about selling substances. They were preying on the vulnerable. Mia had heard the stories of how dangerous gangs operated, how they preyed on those looking for a way out of their struggles. She had never imagined it would be happening so close to her, It was only a matter of time before the situation escalated, and Mia realized she needed to find out everything she could. The weight of the knowledge was beginning to feel too heavy to bear alone. As Mia began to pay more attention to the people around her, the pieces started to fall into place. She saw the same young faces more frequently, each one looking more and more out of place in the club. The men's influence over them seemed to grow with each passing night. The young people who had once been shy and uncertain were now acting more confident, more brazen. They were no longer just hanging around the men in the back corner. They were taking the dangerous items they had received and selling them to others in the club. Mia watched with growing concern as the men expanded their network. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, that maybe the young people were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as the days went on, Mia began to realize that the men were recruiting these young individuals to help further their operation. They weren't just customers, they were becoming part of the business, moving products between the shadows and the dance floor. The more Mia observed, the more she realized the scope of what was going on. The club, a place she had once found exciting and full of potential, had turned into a hub for something much darker. What had started as a few men sitting in a corner, exchanging whispers, had quickly escalated into a full-fledged distribution network. The young people who were now involved in the operation were more than just nervous and eager. They were becoming part of a cycle they couldn't escape. They were hooked, drawn into the dangerous web the men had spun, and Mia could see no way out for them. One night, Mia saw something that left her with a sinking feeling. A young woman, no older than 20, was sitting at the bar with one of the men. Mia had served her drinks on several occasions, and she had always seemed quiet and distant. But tonight there was something different about her. Her eyes were wide, as though she was constantly on edge. She kept looking toward the door, as though waiting for something to happen. The man she was sitting with was calm, collected as he spoke to her in a low voice. From the way the young woman was nodding, it was clear she was involved in whatever was happening in the back corner. Mia couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. It was brief, but the words that stood out were chilling. The man mentioned something about making sure the younger crowd is involved, and how the club was just the beginning. Mia's heart skipped a beat. Was this operation larger than she had realized? She had thought the club was just the meeting point, but now it seemed like the whole city was part of the plan. These men were not just selling substances to a few customers. They were recruiting young people, pulling them into their network, and using the club to expand their reach. The young woman, who had seemed so nervous just weeks ago, was now carrying a small package wrapped in plastic. She stood up from the bar and headed toward the back door, disappearing into the night. Mia could feel her pulse racing. She knew exactly what was happening. The items they were distributing were more than just drugs. They were dangerous, potent, and increasingly widespread. Mia had witnessed enough to realize that the men were creating a cycle of addiction, control, and manipulation. The club, once a place of music and escape, had transformed into a breeding ground for a dangerous gang's influence. Mia knew she couldn't stand by and watch this unfold. The web the men had spun was becoming harder to untangle, and she feared that if she didn't act soon, the damage would be irreversible. The weight of her knowledge grew heavier with each passing night, and Mia realized that it was only a matter of time before things spiraled out of control. Mia's fears grew as she began to piece together the truth. The men were not just a gang. They were part of a larger network that operated in the dark corners of the city. Mia learned that they were distributing dangerous substances, drugs to be exact, to the young people who came to the club. What was worse, they were using the club as a front for their operation, recruiting vulnerable teenagers and young adults who were looking for an easy way to fit in or make money. The more Mia watched, the more she realized just how deep the operation went. The men weren't just dealing with customers, they were grooming a new generation to continue their dangerous business. Mia felt trapped in the web they had created. She didn't know who she could trust or how she could get out of it. Then, one night, Mia stumbled upon a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. She was cleaning the back room when she overheard one of the men talking about an upcoming shipment. They spoke in codes, but Mia understood enough to realize that something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. This wasn't just about the club anymore. It was about a larger network, one that reached far beyond the walls of the nightclub. Mia knew she couldn't stay quiet any longer. She had to do something, but what? Reporting it to the authorities could put her life in danger. She had no idea how deep the gang's influence reached, or how they would react if they discovered she knew what they were up to. But as the days went by, the weight of the situation became unbearable. Mia couldn't live with the knowledge that the club, a place she had once loved, was now a breeding ground for harm. She knew she had to make a choice. Mia's decision came one night when she saw one of the men slip something into a young woman's drink. It was a moment of clarity for her. She could no longer stay on the sidelines, pretending everything was fine. With her heart pounding in her chest, Mia took a deep breath and called the authorities. She knew the risks, but she couldn't let it go on any longer. As the police arrived, Mia watched from the back, her hands trembling. The men were arrested, and the young people who had been caught in their grip were taken to safety. Mia's heart sank, but she also felt a sense of relief. She had done the right thing, but it had come at a price. The club was forever changed, and Mia's life too would never be the same. But at least the truth had come to light.